Welcome to the Careers by Jen podcast, episode 181. Today on the podcast, Jen speaks with Jeffrey Shaw about creating exceptional customer retention. My advice is to start with free popcorn for everyone, then follow that with bush babies and penguins in customer service. It's practically impossible to be angry when confronted with a bush baby or a penguin.
You're listening to the Careers by Jen podcast with me, Jen Swanson, the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. If you are in customer service, if you are a salesperson, a business owner, an entrepreneur, a manager, or frankly anyone working for a company with customers or clients of any description, then you'll want to listen to the advice and strategies that Jeffrey Shaw, my guest today, offers on how to keep those customers and those clients coming back. What makes you go back to a business over and over again? I know for me, it's the personal touch. It's the recognition. It's the relationship that develops. Locally, we have a health food store that I shop in. I can actually walk to it from my home, and I can always count on a big smile and a great conversation with the woman who owns the store. Her advice and her enthusiasm and, frankly, her knowledge and her expertise about health and wellness is what keeps me coming back to the store, despite the fact that I could likely get the same or similar products for less money at a bigger box store in town. So what keeps you coming back? What is a factor in your retention as a customer for the stores that you shop at? Well, today's guest, Jeffrey Shaw, is an author, he's a high-end photographer, and he's a customer language expert. And I'm going to start by finding out in our conversation what the biggest mistake is that salespeople make in customer retention. And we'll get to that right after this.
Are you procrastinating? Do you want to start a job search but aren't quite sure where to begin? Is it all just a little overwhelming? At Careers by Jen, we have a 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge to help you get unstuck and move toward finding your dream job. Every day for 5 days, you'll receive an email to your inbox that asks you to complete one task. Every task you complete moves you closer toward your goal. The best part about this challenge is that it's absolutely free. Come over to careersbyjen.com and you'll see the 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on the image of Jen, sign up with your email address, and you'll be 5 days closer to reaching your goal. Why wait when you can get busy? Visit careersbyjen.com after this podcast.
So welcome, Jeffrey Shaw, to Careers by Jen. My first question is, what is the biggest mistake salespeople make in customer retention?
Gosh, that's a big question to start off with. So the biggest mistake, because don't we like to start off a little more positive? But no, I love that actually. Probably the big mistake they make is, and I certainly know I've been the recipient on the receiving end of that many times, is they don't do the homework to know the intimate details of their customer. And, of course, what I refer to as their lingo, right? So if you don't, because lingo is about really understanding the perspective of your ideal customer. So to me, what I hate is when it's a canned presentation, right? When they haven't taken the time to understand the lingo and the deep attributes of whom they're speaking to. Jen, before we were going to sit down today and have our conversation, I checked out your podcast. I read more about you, right? Because to me, before you connect in deep relationship with somebody, it's up to you to go the extra mile, if you will, and make sure you know enough about them. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake. And I think all of us have been on the receiving end of that, when you feel like someone's speaking to you very generically, like they speak to everybody else.
And then you don't feel like an individual. You don't feel like you really matter in that case.
Right. You can smell it, right? I mean, probably my biggest pet peeve, if you will, is, and I get it, although somebody had to explain it to me. You know, how when you call customer service because you have a problem,
Yeah.
and they're just reading a script. They're saying, "I'm so sorry you're having that problem." It's like, no, you're not. I can tell you're not. Like, it's that canned performance, if you will, that it comes across when someone doesn't align what they have. If they haven't taken, this is the product or service I have, and if they haven't taken the time to first make sure that whom they're getting in conversation with, it can actually benefit from what you're offering, and then two, have you done the work to understand how to speak to that individual so that they feel a bond? A quote I say often, which I think very much applies towards salespeople, is people don't hire you because you're the best. They hire you because they feel like you get them and they get you. And it's that bond of getting one another that I know in all my entrepreneurial experience is what creates the best customer retention.
It's a relationship then.
It's a relationship. It's a shared values, right? There's a hook, right? There's and I don't mean a hook in a negative way. It's sort of like, how if you're passionate about dogs, right? If you enjoy dogs, I mean, isn't there an instant bond? I live in a large apartment building and I have 2 dogs, and there's the second you get in an elevator and there's another person there with dogs, like there's immediately a bond, right? Because you have a shared interest. So to me, if you do your homework, I used to put very subtle things on my websites, particularly as a photographer. I would not only share my story, but I'd put little tidbits in there, like I practice Iyengar yoga. Now, Iyengar yoga is really specific. Okay, it's not just yoga. I mean, so there were some people I was like, oh, I practice yoga too. It created a connection and a bond. But I went as far as like identifying the type of yoga, which is Iyengar yoga, and it's very specific. But I tell you, when I came across if someone was on my website and saw that I practiced the same type of yoga they did, it created an immediate bond, right? Because it's sort of it's like a frat, right? It's kind of a community, right? So that, to me, I think the biggest mistake people make is they just don't do that little extra work to understand the true nature of someone and really just speak to that individual.
So your book title is Lingo, and so how would a person change their language to enable that relationship or that bond to be developed?
Mm-hmm. So, and what I mean by lingo, by the way I define it, because technically lingo is a jargon, but if you think about it, a lingo holds communities together, right? A community shares a lingo. But what I like about lingo and the concept of it is that you're actually speaking to deeper levels of someone. You're speaking to their values, their priorities, their lifestyle, their emotional triggers, right? That's in sales. I don't think there's anything more important. One of the best pieces of advice I ever read, I will say, it was Dan Pink. And I wish he had said it to me personally, but but I read it in his book, and he had completely reframed from that point on. It's in his book, To Sell is Human. And it completely reframed from that point on how I viewed sales. And what the way he defines sales is you're actually just moving people. And here's what I love about this, Jen, is that I broke it down even further than he did in the book, and that sales is about moving people. And it is about moving people from indecision to decision. It's about moving people from getting them past what they think they want to what would be better for them. And it's also about emotionally moving people, right? So I love reframing the whole notion of sales to thinking about it as about moving people, and that being the objective of sales. Can I move someone emotionally so that I can then move them from indecision to decision?
And you're doing that on an individual basis, not in a canned way.
In an individual basis, but here you just tapped into what was the trickiest part about writing my book, Lingo, and even trickier to explain it, in that there's a commonality and specifics all at the same time. So I'll give a little context here. I currently, in my life, I serve as a business coach, a podcast host as well. I wrote the book Lingo. I'm a speaker, right? So that's my current role. I have also been a portrait photographer for affluent families for 33 years. And I still do very little of it, but not a lot. But that prior to 8 years ago, that was my mainstay in life, was being a portrait photographer for affluent families. And what I learned, and that's what the whole book of Lingo is about, the strategies I learned to build a successful business. And what I discovered is that there are generalities. I worked with affluent families. So there were common traits amongst those with money. Now, mind you, and I share the story in the book, I didn't come from money. I came from lower middle class. So I had to learn the lingo of affluent people. That's why I stepped up and wrote this book, because I understand the process. If I wanted to serve them, I knew that I had to understand their lingo, and I didn't know it. At 23 years old, when I was creating my photography business and being lower middle class, I knew nothing about the lingo of affluent people. So I had to learn their lingo. And what I realized that there are some common denominators amongst the value system and priorities and responsibilities of those that have money. So for example, when you have money, money is no longer an excuse. Right? When you have money, you can't turn to your children and explain why 2 of the children got an Ivy League education and 1 got a community college education. Right? There's a burden of responsibility that comes with having money, of making sure your children are treated fairly. And as a photographer, that worked out beautiful for me, because that meant I had to photograph this family on a frequent basis. So all the children were photographed, the equal amounts, if you will, at the same ages even. They all celebrated the same big life events through photographs. So there were those to me were very common traits. Now, then you hone in, and yes, individuals have their own subtleties. And I look at it as lingo is the language, and the individual way of speaking to someone is the accent. And just like here in the United States, I know you're in Canada, but in the United States, we're a big country, right? So there's different accents throughout the country, as you do as well. So there's a lingo, and then there's accents. And to speak so you're sort of speaking to your target audience, if you will, by understanding their secret language, their lingo. And then you speak to the individual by embellishing it with the accent that means the most to them.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Well, I said, as a photographer working with, I can give you kind of both sides. So as a photographer, I worked with affluent families, and I actually felt as a photographer, when I honed into it, that the lingo I was speaking was the lingo of responsibility, because I came to understand that when you have money, and money is no longer an excuse, you are held to a higher level of responsibility to your children. You're held to a higher responsibility of, how you show up in the world, that you attend certain social events. There's a lot of burden of responsibility. So I felt that the true language the true lingo that I was speaking to my photography clients was the lingo of responsibility. And my job really was helping them be the most responsible parents they can be on all things related to photography. Right. So they never had to turn to any of their kids and explain why they didn't, why the youngest child wasn't photographed as often. So that was the broad sense. But then the specific sense, I worked very closely with families, and I would also track the very specifics of what they wanted. So for example, many of the portraits that I created for my families were framed in custom made frames. And I kept really accurate records. So at any time I could identify that specific client has these certain frames, so that when I ordered new frames, they could match or they could coordinate. We would even, at the time, many years ago, I had a brick and mortar store for many years. And when people would come in, the first time they would visit us, we would ask them how they take their coffee, so we could give their coffee to them. But then that would go into their digital file. So the next time they came in, we would show up with the coffee fixed just the way they like it. Right. So that's so it's, you attract and you draw in your ideal customer by speaking their lingo, which is sort of like the language of a community. But then when you get them there, you retain them by speaking even more specifically to their individual needs. May I give you another example real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So, because I love this, is always one of my favorite ones. So one of the things that as a photographer I did for many years is created holiday cards for my clients. Because again, amongst affluent clientele, they're extremely social, and it's in tradition and in lingo of that community to send a beautifully custom made holiday card with a photograph on it of their family or their children. So I would design these for my clients, and when I would deliver these cards, the cards came with a pen of like a kind of a nice calligraphy nib pen, with the ink it matched the ink on the return address on the back of the envelope, so that when they addressed the envelope, the addressing on the front of the envelope matched the return address on the back of the flap. Now, it's a level of detail. And truthfully, Jen, it was a $2.50 pen, but you would think I gave someone a brick of gold, because the value of that, because I knew them so specific, I know that it would just be out of their way of thinking for the envelope to not be perfectly coordinated. Right. I also know that if I didn't provide it, because it's important to them that everything be perfect and coordinated, they would run around town looking for the perfect red to match their envelope. So why not do that for them? So just having that simple $2.50 pen tucked into the box of their greeting cards would mean the world to them. And again, part of customer retention. And there were years where my staff or I somehow forgot to put the pen in their box or something. And we would get phone calls. People like, well, where's my pen this year? Right. So it's again, actually all our clients would get that, but it's understanding the broad lingo and then understanding the accents that you can really use to embellish your relationship with the individual clients that creates that exceptional retention.
So if you are not a business owner, if you are somebody who is working in sales for a company, what are some of the strategies you can employ if you're starting out with a new client? If somebody walks into your place of business who's never been there before, how can you hook that customer or get to that level of bonding with a customer quickly?
Well, first of all, I think if you're working for another company and you are the salesperson within that company that creates these exceptional experiences, that's awesome. That's what's going to make you stand out, right? That's what's going to make you an exceptional, successful salesperson in your field. And, it's, I don't know if you've ever come across the book by John Ruhlin called Giftology.
I've heard of it. I haven't.
Yeah. Terrific book for salespeople, I think. I had John as a guest on my podcast. And first of all, I love the idea of giftology is it's more than just giving gifts. It's a whole philosophy. And that's, of course, a fantastic strategy for salespeople is to learn how, but the gifts he's giving are not just your massive run of corporate gifts with the corporate logo on it. In fact, as he'll say in the book, if you give a gift with your corporate logo on it, he wants to hit you with it, right? I mean, just it's not a gift should not be promoting your business, right? The gift should be given that's so personal. He tells the story in the book of someone that he wanted to meet that he knew would have great influence in his career, and he intentionally went to a speaking event where this leader was speaking and took note of the fact that he was wearing a Brooks Brothers shirt, and then went through the trouble of buying some merchandise at Brooks Brothers and sending it to him.
Wow.
It's the little details like that. I have, I knew one of my clients really enjoyed macaroons, which I do as well. I'm a bit obsessed with them. So for the holidays one year, I had a Christmas tree made with different colored macaroons. So the macaroons looked like ornaments. It was like a desktop tree. And I had that shipped to them, like literally a Christmas tree of macaroons, which are very colorful and beautiful. I often will focus on the children because I'm a family portrait photographer. I had custom made pajamas made for the two of the children of one of the families where their last name was all over the pajamas. Because parents, what makes a parent happier than you paying attention to their children? So it's, if you can, it's noticing the smallest of things. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a thing. A good friend of mine has an unbelievable ability to remember the smallest of details that I've said to her, even if it's just the names of people in my life. And again, she's a good friend, but I don't even know how she remembers these tiny little details. And sometimes, like I said, it's just recalling someone's name. So I think that's important. If in conversation, you can find out the children's names of the the client you're presenting to. And the next time you connect with them, just to simply bring up their name somehow. That's so powerful because it shows that you've paid attention.
And yeah, because not everybody's going to be able to actually provide a thing in the role that they're in. But the people that do notice or that pay attention, or that so that the customer feels understood or seen even.
Right. Well, isn't it Dale Carnegie that had said the most beautiful thing people love to hear is their own name?
Right.
Now, Jen, how many times in this interview have I said your name already?
I don't know.
Go back and listen several times, right? I always know, believe me, I'm sure there are plenty. I have a podcast. There are plenty of guests that come on that haven't taken the time to even know what my name is barely. Right? Where before I go on a podcast, like I said, I read about your show. I want to know who you're speaking to. I want to know your audience. And of course, I know your name. And the emotional impact of simply knowing someone's name, it's felt. People feel when their name is mentioned. So it's just my natural speech pattern to inject the person's name that I'm speaking to. But I always make sure, so it's things like that. It doesn't have to be a thing that you purchase. I think recalling little details that are important to somebody is incredibly powerful. I was out with one of my clients once that I remember I had lunch with her once, and I remember her liking a certain type of sugar for her coffee, like a sweetener. And the next time I had lunch with her, it wasn't amongst the sweeteners that was there. And when the waitress came over, I asked for it.
Oh.
And the client nearly fell. She looked at me with her head tilted, and she said, "You remembered that that's my preferred sweetener?" I said, "I think it was like stevia or something." I said, "Yes, I did." Now, I will tell you, I remember nothing. Like I don't have them. But this is the key, I think, for salespeople, is to have a system, right? Do you have a system in place? Do you have a database or whatever your system is? So I believe in creating a system for everything. If I run into somebody on the street and they mention the possibility of wanting to connect or what have you, I will immediately put that into my calendar system that will remind me on the dashboard the day that day comes along. So, it can seem like an overwhelming challenge to take on such details and to speak, one's lingo so specifically, but you can accomplish that if you put good systems in place.
Does it ever feel a little creepy?
I love that you're asking this because I do, because I was, I had a fantastic editor who was writing the book. And one of the first exercises she gave me, she goes, "I want you to make a list of objections that you think people might have." And the first objection I listed was I was afraid people would question whether speaking the lingo of your customers and knowing them that well is creepy. And so we addressed that right in the beginning of the book, that it's where I'm coming from and where I'm suggesting that your audience and salespeople come from is from a place of empathy, right? I truly have a deep desire to understand people that well. And in the book, I compare it to personal relationships. To me, when in our personal relationships, if our significant other or partner does something for us that we know is deeply meaningful to us and we didn't ask for it, that to me is a home run in relationships. And I also reference in the book, have you ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages?
Yes.
Yeah. So I reference that book in my book Lingo because it touches in that, right? It's knowing in 5 love languages, for those that haven't read it, the author identifies 5 ways in which people feel love. So whether there's only 5 or there's more than 5, that's one can figure that out. But it's understanding with empathy what emotionally moves someone. And so to me, it doesn't come across creepy if it's authentic and genuine, and you're actually doing it from a place of empathy. If it feels like it's coming across as a sales technique, then yeah, it's going to feel that way. So I think you have to be clean in your intention.
I think the reason that I asked that question is years and years ago, I went to a dentist, and I went to this dentist once and had a conversation with the hygienist and had my cleaning and all the rest of it. And it was a year later or a year and a half later, I can't remember, I come back. It's a completely different hygienist. And she asks me if, by name, if one of my kids had finished their program at the school they were going to. Like college program. And I thought, how do you know that? I've never met you before.
Yeah.
I don't know you. And you're asking about my kid and you know their name? Like I found that just, I thought, oh, you have
and
a
it's because
system.
it's a change of person, right?
Yeah.
Where, I think that, a nice way of done. I that would feel a little odd because the person changed. But hey, in sales, sometimes that does happen where one person handling an account, gets handed off, if you will. So to me, if you've absorbed someone else's file and you know that level of detail, I would just mention that. It's like, yeah, hey, I noticed that, when Mary was handling your account, she marked, she made a note that your son was finishing this program. I have a cousin that went to a similar, I would make the connection. Mm-hmm. Right? Because then I think it could be genuine, or, it probably is just better you start that relationship over, right? So the new person handling the account or a hygienist in your case, just with the same level of intended empathy can just build a new relationship with you.
Right. So you've mentioned a couple of times about values. And so I want to ask you about how to find out somebody's values quickly when you first meet them. But we're going to take a quick break. So when we come back, I'd like to jump into that question. Do you want someone to listen? Do you need help setting goals for yourself? Do you want someone to keep you accountable for your progress and to ask good questions that will help to move you toward your success? Have you got a resume that you want reviewed or updated? Do you need help deciding what kind of work you'd like to transition into? If any of these sound like you, I've got some coaching spaces open at Careers by Jen, and I would be happy to work with you to achieve your goals. From a single session resume review to multi-session career or life coaching, there are several packages to choose from. Go to careersbyjen.com, click on online programs, and you will see the coaching packages on the courses page. Select your package and let's get started on your future today. So I'm speaking with Jeffrey Shaw, the Lingo guy, and we're talking today about creating exceptional customer retention. So Jeffrey, you mentioned values a couple of times in our conversation, and I'd like to find out how a person in sales can get to that level with a customer pretty quickly to be able to start building that bond.
Yeah. It's a matter of work. So in my book, Lingo, I teach in there a 5-step strategy to build what I refer to as the secret language strategy. And the first of those 5 steps is perspective, right? You can't really learn, about someone. You can't speak their language until you first understand their perspective, right? What are their values, how they see the world. So I personally, and I share the story in the book, that I put myself in the proverbial shoes of the people I want to serve. Now, as a coach and a speaker and all that I do today, this is easier for me because I am a creative warrior, which is the name of my podcast and the work that I do. And the audience that I am reaching through my podcast and through my coaching and speaking are creative entrepreneurs. Doesn't mean that they're in traditional creative businesses at all. It just means they're entrepreneurs doing something out of the box. And, that's been my whole life. So I'm fortunate in that I know there are lingo, but there's still, Jen, a very big difference. And I think this is really important for people to understand. We are rarely serving, our ideal customer is rarely exactly like us. And I think sometimes we think that they're supposed to be. When we think about the idea of ideal customers, we think that they're supposed to be somebody that that's like us. And I think that's rarely the case, because if you have a service to provide, chances are your ideal customer is probably better off than you are in order for them to afford your services, which in turn you then hire people to do services for you that you can afford. if you've developed a product or a technology, most products and technologies are created because it solves a problem that you want to see go away. So by creating it, you no longer have that problem, but you need to speak the lingo of the people who are still encountering that problem. And that's the same thing with even personal development, right? Most coaches and, myself included, I see myself as a leader of the creative warrior community. I don't necessarily have some of the current problems that my followers have, the financial struggles or some of the other, but I know those struggles because I've been there. So what's important is that you have a willingness, again, with empathy, to understand their perspective, and that you do the work so that you can understand their values. So whether it's, in my case, I would visit brick and mortar stores and I would understand, like, what do affluent families who I would photograph, what do they see? What do they experience? You can do a lot of research online based on whom your ideal customer is and how you're serving them. Go to where they go, read what they read, so that you can understand what is it they value. Do they value time, or do they value money? Right? Because for the most part, I think many people today value time over money, which is why we will pay more to get something done quickly. Right? Are they cost conscious or value conscious? Right? So what's their higher priority? What's their higher value? Is it that they get the cheapest price, or is it that they get better value? They'll pay the money, but they want to feel like they're getting more value than what they paid for. Right. So you may be, I joke often about IKEA. I love to, when I speak on stages, I love to go through a bunch of well-known brands and ask people if they can imagine what the lingo is. So I'll start off easy. Like, what's the lingo of Walmart? Well, it's very cost conscious. What's the lingo of Target? Target's lingo is value conscious. People will spend money. They just want to feel like they're getting more than what they paid for. Well, what's the lingo of IKEA? Do you want to take a shot at that?
What's the lingo of IKEA? I
love turning the tables.
Confusion.
Exactly.
Frustration.
So, yeah. At the end of the day, I would say the lingo of IKEA is do-it-yourself pride. Right? It's more than just do it yourself. It's a real sense of pride. But I love to point it out on stages like, well, here's what the lingo of IKEA is not. It's not the lingo of time, of saving time. It's a nightmare, right? For those of us, my priority in life is saving time. Like everything I do, I'm trying to figure out how I can save time. IKEA, although I think I respect it tremendously as a brand. And yes, I have gone to IKEA on a lazy Saturday afternoon, but it's not the lingo of saving time, because it's a very long, drawn out process, right? Even, when you finally leave, you come home, you have to watch YouTube videos to figure out how to put together what you bought. And it is not the lingo of time, but it is the lingo of going through all that angst for the pleasure of standing back with your hands on your hips and saying, I did that, right? So it's the lingo of do-it-yourself pride, but it's not the one of saving time. So, my value is saving time. That wouldn't be my chosen brand. That's how you can find out that if you could even study where your ideal customer is shopping, right? Look at the difference between, ShopRite, if they still exist, Stop and Shop, ShopRite, that kind of grocery store versus Whole Foods.
Right.
Right. You can start projecting what the values are. The value for someone going to Whole Foods is a value for health and nutrition. And chances are they live a certain lifestyle that's aligned with that. Or someone shopping at a larger big box grocery store, Costco, for example, then their value is more about the savings of money. So you can understand people's values if you understand what they're already doing in their life and what their perspective is.
And so to be able to do that as a salesperson, to go out and research, how would you even start doing that?
Well, as Lingo is written, I tell a lot of stories in there. I actually had to go. I mean, I guess there's advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was, if you will, I went to a lot of brick and mortar stores and brands that served the affluent market. I tell a wonderful story in the book about a visit to Bergdorf Goodman, which is one of the most exclusive department stores in the world. And because that's where my target audience would go. So I wanted to go there. So I would pound the pavement, right? I would go to brick and mortar stores, which has the advantage of it being very tangible. Like you can really get a sense of the experience. However, it took a lot of work. And nowadays, with so much of our business being online, we're serving a worldwide audience. So you might have to do more of your research online. But just what publications are they reading? I mean, that's a place to start. What blogs are popular amongst, like, one of my coaching clients has a very successful blog called Luxury Travel Mom. And it is a blog specifically for wealthy moms that travel with their kids and what resorts they can go to that are child friendly. What 5-star resorts in the world can they go to that's child friendly? And she blogs about the experience. And when she goes on a trip to do a review, she always brings one of her children. So every blog post is not just her perspective, but also the perspective of the child and what that child experienced. And she has other moms. We call it her momtourage. So she has other moms that, because she can't do all the traveling. It became so popular. She has free trips, weekly all over the world if she wanted them, but she has to send other moms and their kids to fulfill that. But it's a trusted resource. It's a very trusted resource and very popular. She's actually the number one. If you Google, I think, Disney VIP, Disney has, which a lot of people don't, I wouldn't know, but Disney has a whole VIP experience, which is very different than what us normal people experience when we go to Disney. And if you Google Disney VIP, her name comes up before Disney.
Wow.
She's so well known for being able to give feedback on that program. Right. So she's a trusted resource. So if you knew she's a trusted resource, you would go to that blog and you would understand the lingo of affluent travelers, for example, if that's what you're selling. She said to me one day in one of our calls, speaking to the lingo of her luxury travelers, she had said, yeah, you can give a luxury travel, they don't want discounts, but you give them free water and you're their best friend. And it's absolutely true. Look at the psychology of airport lounges, right? I mean, I will show up to the airport 2.5 hours early because I'll get free cheese. Right? I mean, it's just, I would rather that than save me $100 on my airfare. I'd rather get the free cheese.
It's all about the free cheese.
It is. It's all about the free cheese, right? But that's my lingo. My lingo is give me a comfortable place to sit that's not too noisy and free cheese. I'd much rather have that over a discount.
Jeffrey. So customer retention, is it about trust? Is it about value? Is it about being known? What's it about?
I think it's about relationship in a way that is, again, a hook, but not in a negative way. It's just, it becomes really hard for people to break a relationship with you if they feel like they have a close relationship with you. And I'll also say, Jen, it's also thinking differently. And I think this is a wonderful thought for salespeople. Someone asked me once, or someone took a guess. I have an incredible retention rate in my photography business for even in my peak years. Because we watched this metric. We watched our customer retention metric over everything else. Because to me, if customer retention was slipping, it was indicative of a bigger problem, right? So I watched that closely, and our retention rate was typically 60 to 70%, which was wonderful because that meant I only had to attract and gain new business of 30 to 40%, which meant our actual marketing budget could be very, very low. My marketing budget was typically about 1% of my gross sales because I didn't need much of a marketing budget because I was actually needing to attract so few people. We put all our efforts towards the customer retention, which costs almost nothing to create because it's relationship building. But I would also think differently. So one time I was being interviewed and someone took a guess as to why I had such a high retention rate. And they said, well, I would imagine as a family photographer, you always spoke, you took really good care of them and you spoke about, the portraits in the future, what have you. And I said, actually, no. The way I created amazing customer retention as a family portrait photographer was the very first time they inquired about my services and I would do an in-home visit. I would stand with this client before a blank wall or a hallway and say to her, usually the mom, I would say to her, how do you envision this room or this wall being decorated with family portraits over the next 10 years? Right. So I was always assuming this was an ongoing relationship. It was never transactional to me. I wasn't asking her about her portraits in that moment. I set the stage immediately by assuming that we were going to have such a bond and relationship and letting her know that I was going to take such good care of her that she wouldn't consider going to someone else. The conversation began with asking, how do you envision this over the next 10 years?
And that's such a lovely way to do it. I mean, I remember going through a service And the person, oh, my stomach's growling. I can hear it.
I couldn't hear it, so you're okay.
It's lunchtime. I had this transaction with this person, and she was amazing, and she was lovely, and she was attentive, and she was wonderful until she got my money. And then I was not the shiny new object anymore. And off she went to woo the next shiny new object. And this was the kind of relationship where I was going to be in the same circles with this person from time to time because of the product. And I was just there, and it was, oh, hi, nice to see you. But it wasn't nearly the attention that the people who had not yet gone into relationship with her were getting. And I found that to be really shallow.
Yeah, one of my biggest pet peeves in business is the focus on new customer acquisition at the sacrifice of retention. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. And I try to the people I work with and coach, I try to really point out that, part of your business's objectives, you should have programs designed specifically for existing clients and flip the whole thing upside down, because so often what we see in business are offers for new customers only. And as an existing customer, you're insulted. Right, whether it's your cable company or phone bill or hair salon, that's so irritating for us. So if you're in a relational business, that's a horrible message, right? So I say flip that around. If you're in a business that requires, sales is as in business requires relationships. If you're in a relational based business, then flip that around and actually have programs and things that are accessible only to your existing customers. Instead of the new customer incentive, because it makes you feel horrible because somebody has gone out of their way to get your attention and pay attention to you in the beginning. Joey Coleman, I don't know if Joey wrote an amazing book about customer retention called Never Lose a Customer Again, I think it is. And he tells a fantastic story in the book. I had him as a guest on my podcast as well. He'd be wonderful for you. He tells the story, which is a pretty typical scenario, how often, someone, a salesperson caters to your every need. And he makes the comparison as if it was a marriage. And he does a much better job telling the story. But imagine, if you compare this, imagine you court someone, right? You date them, you woo them, you engage, right? So you propose marriage, and then you have this incredible wedding ceremony, and then you carry your new, partner in life through the threshold and bring him or her into the room, and you say, "This has been wonderful, and now I'm going to hand you off to John, and he's going to take care of the rest of your needs."
Yeah.
Or John or Mary or whomever you're handing it off to, right? But don't we experience that in sales where someone woos you to the close and then hands you off?
Right.
Right. So, I mean, that's kind of what you experience. It's a horrible feeling, and it doesn't need to be that way by any stretch.
Where can people find you and find out more about you and your book?
Sure. Well, as you might imagine, wanting to be true to my lingo and my word, I like to connect. I like to create a relationship first. So we've put together what I think is a wonderful gift for your listeners, which they can find at jeffreyshaw.com/careers by Jen. And Jen has two N's. So it's jeffreyshaw.com/careers by Jen. And in there, you will find the Lingo Media Kit, which has an infographic of the 5 steps of secret language strategy to build lingo, to speak the lingo of your ideal customers. It also has a free chapter of the book, which is chapter 3, not chapter 1. Chapter 3, because that's the chapter about perspective, which we spoke about, which is the basis of everything. And there's an audio version of that chapter as well. So that's the place to start, because once you start there, if you feel aligned and if the way I present myself resonates for you, then my links to my book are there, my social media, and then I invite you to reach out, because then we know that we get each other.
That's great. Well, thank you for putting that together. That's wonderful.
You're very welcome.
And what's a last piece of advice to leave the Careers by Jen listener with today?
I think most businesses are built backwards in that, we have great ideas, whether you work for a company and you're following the mission of the company, which I think this is the added challenge that salespeople who work for other companies are handed. They're handed this almost impossible task of finding customers to fit into a business, because the business was set up wrong in the first place, in that it was set up with a great idea. And then a fleet of salespeople were put in charge of going out and finding customers to fit into the business. When the right way to build a business is to actually have a really clear understanding of the lingo of your ideal customer and then build a business for them, right? So if you're in a position as a salesperson, work for another company, and you feel like you've been handed this really big challenge of now finding customers, I think you can do yourself a favor by understanding the lingo of the specific people that you want to reach. And then you can build your own business, if you will, within the business that you're serving to attract your ideal customers. And this way, you're not going about the rest of your life trying to convince people of your value, but rather by speaking their lingo, you're inviting the people who already value who you are and value what you do.
That's great. You've given me lots to think about, and I'm sure for the people listening as well. Thank you for being on the show today, Jeffrey. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Careers by Jen with Jen Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. You know, if every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.